9:47 at night. A voicemail exactly 31 seconds long. "Don't come back. This family doesn't need you." I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. When a forensic auditor gets cut off, they trace the money. My mother thought she was kicking her daughter out, unaware she just triggered an audit that would bankrupt her. If you always fund your family, comment where you are listening from. You will rewind the ending. My name is Ivy Gonzalez. I am 34 years old, and my profession is dismantling illusions as a forensic audit manager at Red Mesa Integrity Group, a premier financial investigations firm situated in the heart of Denver. My job is to look at systems that appear perfectly healthy and locate the rot. I am the person they call when the numbers look a little too perfect, when the ledgers balance with suspicious ease. I have built a formidable reputation on a singular, uncompromising skill, the ability to identify the bleeding loopholes in structures that everyone else insists are fundamentally sound. I do not deal in narratives. I deal in raw data, verifiable transactions, and the cold, unyielding truth of the paper trail. At exactly 9:47 on a Tuesday night, that professional objectivity collided violently with my personal life. My phone vibrated on the marble countertop of my kitchen island. It was a single new voicemail from my mother, Monica Hale. When I pressed play, I immediately noticed the acoustics. There was no background noise, no ambient sounds of the house. It was a staged recording. Her voice was completely devoid of its usual dramatic cadence. Instead, it was uncharacteristically flat, cold, and decisive, delivered exactly like an actor reading from a legally vetted script. The message was brief and intended to be devastating. She was officially cutting off all contact. She explicitly forbade me from ever stepping foot inside the family home in Aurora. She delivered the exile with the tone of an absolute monarch banishing a traitor. The shock that washed over me was not rooted in grief, but in the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her premise. The deepest irony of her declaration was the geographical reality I did not even live in that house. I possessed my own quiet, immaculately kept apartment in the Denver Tech Center. It was a sanctuary paid for entirely by my own grueling billable hours. Yet, Monica was deliberately weaponizing the emotional concept of the family home. She was orchestrating the profound psychological punishment of being cast out of the tribe. It was a masterful, manipulative climax to years of systematically exploiting my deep-seated sense of duty. What her theatrical eviction conveniently ignored was the subterranean financial reality. I was the silent engine keeping the Aurora house running. I was the ghost in the machine who paid the exorbitant utility bills, the premium insurance packages, and the sudden, always urgent maintenance costs. She was utilizing the threat of emotional homelessness against the very person who secretly financed the roof over her head. A normal daughter would have broken down. She would have frantically dialed the number back, demanding explanations, pleading for forgiveness for whatever invisible crime she had supposedly committed. Or screaming into the receiver. I did neither. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my phone, opened the text thread with Monica, and typed a single, isolated word. Received. I hit send. That 8-letter confirmation was not an act of petty rebellion. It was a formal acknowledgement of a shifted paradigm. It was incredibly cold, and it served as a definitive signal to myself. From the second that message delivered, I ceased to be a participant in a toxic, cyclical family dispute. The emotional connection was formally severed. This was now a hostile environment, and Monica Hale had just transformed herself from an aggrieved mother into the primary subject of a comprehensive audit. When my team at Red Mesa handles a corporate security breach, the immediate, non-negotiable first step is to lock down the perimeter. We isolate the compromised systems to stop the bleeding. Sitting in the sterile light of my apartment, I applied that exact same incident response protocol to my own existence. I opened my laptop and initiated a total, uncompromising financial quarantine. I began with the domestic infrastructure, moving with practiced, methodical speed. I logged into every single online portal connected to the Aurora property. I systematically changed the passwords for the electricity, the water, the high-speed internet, and the premium cable packages, all of which were registered under my name and my social security number. I navigated to the billing sections and ruthlessly canceled every automated clearinghouse transfer and recurring credit card charge. I dug into the security preferences and permanently detached all trusted devices. Ensuring that the IP addresses associated with my mother's tablet and desktop computer could no longer bypass two-factor authentication to access my payment methods. I want to be perfectly clear, I did not engage in malicious sabotage. I did not log in and request a total shutoff of their power grid or their water supply. I am a professional, not a vandal. I merely executed a textbook withdrawal of financial backing. I removed my name, my routing numbers, and my credit card details from the roll of the designated payer. I then diligently updated the primary contact information on every account, redirecting all future invoices, past due notices, and final warnings directly to Monica's personal email address and her mobile phone number. It was entirely lawful. It was exactly according to standard operating procedure. I was simply handing the liability back to the woman who owned the house. Once the domestic perimeter was secured, I pivoted to the commercial liabilities. I accessed my encrypted banking application and targeted the corporate accounts. First, I found the secondary credit card that my mother utilized for her event business, Cedar and Silk Bridal House. It was meant for emergencies, but had morphed into a slush fund for imported inventory. With a firm click, I suspended the card. Next, I located the backup corporate line. This was the card my cousin Brooke habitually borrowed, always claiming she needed it to process rush orders for demanding brides. I froze that card solid. The financial arteries to the business were officially clamped. I pushed my chair back and waited. Over the course of the next 15 minutes, my secondary monitor became a theater of consequences. A cascading sequence of automated notifications began to scroll across the screen, stacking up in my inbox like a falling line of dominoes. Payment method removed. Billing update required. Action needed. Your card has been declined. I watched the digital evidence of my withdrawal materialize in real time. For my entire life, the threat of my family's silence had been a terrifying prospect, a weapon they used to enforce compliance. But sitting there, watching the payment rejections roll in, the profound quiet of my apartment felt entirely different. It did not feel like abandonment. It felt like absolute, unassailable control. I closed the email client and opened a fresh, blank Excel spreadsheet. The grid of empty cells stared back at me, offering the comforting, logical structure of an impending investigation. I opened the Save As dialog box, deleted the default workbook name, and typed the official designation for my new project. Hail Family Exposure, Internal Reconstruction. I pressed the Enter key. The file was saved to my encrypted drive. The messy, painful narrative of a family tragedy had concluded. The forensic reconstruction of Monica Hale's financial survival had officially begun. The human memory is a notoriously unreliable filing system. It softens edges, rewrites history to protect our fragile egos, and constantly rationalizes systemic abuse from those we love. Bank data, however, possesses no such empathy. It does not care about your feelings, and it never lies. I spent the dark, silent hours of Tuesday night and the pale, unforgiving hours of Wednesday morning pulling down 9 years of financial history. The blue light of my dual monitors cast long, harsh shadows across my living room as I initiated the extraction. I scraped personal checking account statements, automated clearinghouse logs, archived receipt photographs, email confirmations, and peer-to-peer payment application histories. I funneled every disparate piece of digital confetti into a master spreadsheet, meticulously constructing the architecture of my past. When the pivot table finally rendered the grand total, the screen illuminated a figure that arrested the breath in my lungs. Over the past 9 years, more than $412,000 had bled directly from my personal accounts into the gaping, insatiable maw of my family's ongoing emergencies. My eyes scanned the incoming column. The section meant to track the earnest repayments Monica swore upon her life she would make. It contained nothing but scattered, insignificant fractions. There were a few sporadic $50 transfers, usually accompanied by a dramatic excuse about a slow retail month or an unexpected medical bill. The rest of the column was a desolate graveyard of broken verbal promises. In forensic accounting, the true narrative always reveals itself in the groupings. I began sorting the massive outflow into categories. There were the sprawling, relentless lease payments for the commercial warehouse, holding the floral inventory for cedar and silk. There were the monthly premiums for my mother's luxury car insurance. There was the perpetually bloated cellular plan covering every cousin and aunt living under her roof. Deeper down in the ledger, I found the heavy, staggered payments for my stepfather Grant's old legal defense fees. An ugly chapter we were all instructed to pretend never happened. And then there were the constant, desperate payroll advances funneled directly to my cousin Brooke, the supposed bookkeeper who could never quite balance her own life, let alone manage a bridal company's complex ledger. Staring at the categorized columns, the psychological architecture of my exploitation became glaringly visible. Every single one of those transfers was attached to a specific memory, a distinct moment of emotional leverage. I realized I could map my entire adult life by the crises I was forced to fund. Whenever I tried to establish a boundary, whenever I attempted to finally close my wallet and prioritize my own future, Monica would deploy her fail-safe mechanism. She would look at me with manufactured exhaustion, her eyes brimming with a perfectly calibrated mix of disappointment and desperation, and deliver her favorite line, "You are the only one smart enough to save this house." She brilliantly disguised my indentured servitude as exceptionalism. I realized sitting there in the quiet dawn that I had not merely been financially drained, I had been systematically conditioned. I was trained from adolescence to believe that my intrinsic worth as a human being was directly proportional to my financial utility to the family structure. That was why setting a boundary always felt like committing a mortal sin. If I hesitated to pay a bill, I was not just being frugal. I was actively choosing to let my family drown. But the true sickness of the situation did not fully crystallize until I began examining the memo lines on the digital peer-to-peer transfers. As I read the brief, seemingly innocuous notes attached to the funds I had sent over the years, a cold dread pooled in my stomach. Many of the transaction notes read, "Ivy volunteered," or "Gift for the business from Ivy." I had never written those notes. Monica had routinely requested the funds using the application, pre-filling the memo lines herself before I blindly clicked approve in the middle of my chaotic, demanding workdays. She was using the exact same phrases she parroted at Thanksgiving dinners and Sunday church gatherings. She had been deliberately, meticulously laying down a paper trail of my supposed willing philanthropy. She was not just taking my money in moments of panic. She had been preparing her defense narrative for years, a lesser auditor, or perhaps just a normal daughter reeling from the agonizing sting of maternal rejection, would have let anger guide her hand. She might have deleted rows, altered descriptions to reflect the bitter truth, or contaminated the raw data with furious, emotional annotations. I touched nothing. I preserved the absolute integrity of the data environment. Instead, I created a new column adjacent to the transaction logs and began applying standard evidentiary tags. I categorized every single line item with absolute, clinical detachment, authorized, unauthorized, unverifiable, potential misrepresentation. I was no longer a daughter trying to understand why she was unloved. I was an investigator processing a highly volatile crime scene. As I reconciled the final quarter of the data from 4 years prior, the spreadsheet flagged a severe routing anomaly. I traced the discrepancy back to its source and felt the blood drain entirely from my face, leaving me cold. The routing number attached to a series of substantial vendor payments belonged to Gonzalez Controls. It was a limited liability company I had formed for freelance risk management consulting and had completely shuttered 3 years ago. The entity was supposed to be dormant, the tax filings finalized and closed. Yet, staring at the current transaction logs, I saw an active, pulsing rhythm of micro-deposits and wholesale vendor withdrawals cycling through that allegedly dead account. Someone in that house was actively using my dormant corporate identity. They were operating it as an intermediary shell to wash income, disguise expenditures, and likely secure lines of credit using my pristine professional reputation. The pieces locked into a devastatingly clear picture. The voicemail playing on a loop in my mind suddenly shifted its meaning entirely. The cold, practiced tone. The abrupt eviction, the strict prohibition from returning to the property. It was not a mother losing her temper in a flare of dramatic family tension. It was a calculated, preemptive strike. Monica was not casting out a rebellious daughter. She was aggressively cutting off a prime witness. She knew the foundational rod of her financial life was finally reaching a critical mass, and she was severing ties to remove me from the blast radius. She was effectively framing me as the runaway villain to the rest of the family before the undeniable, filthy paperwork was inevitably exposed to the light. Exactly 48 hours passed before the structural integrity of Monica's reality completely collapsed. The initial shockwave hit on a Thursday morning at a premium floral wholesaler. My mother attempted to process a massive order of imported silk peonies and rare orchids necessary for a high-profile weekend wedding. The cashier ran the corporate card. The terminal beeped, rejecting the transaction with a harsh, undeniable red light. Declined. A few hours later, a frantic, automated notification arrived from her merchant processor, a substantial venue deposit, representing a massive chunk of client funds, had been flagged and suspended due to a sudden lack of verifying backup capital. The invisible safety net was gone, and the operational freefall had definitively begun. The illusion of self-sufficiency shattered email by email, hour by hour. For years, Monica operated under the comfortable, arrogant delusion that the foundational pillars of her life were simply automated constants, magical utilities that required no effort or capital on her part. Now, her personal and professional inboxes were suffocating under the weight of overdue notices. The comprehensive home insurance policy demanded immediate attention to avoid cancellation. The high-speed fiber internet powering her bridal showroom threatened imminent disconnection. The expensive monthly subscription for her boutique's elite client scheduling software was suspended, effectively locking her out of her own business calendar. The massive lease for the climate-controlled storage warehouse holding her fragile, expensive inventory was suddenly marked delinquent. She had lived in a frictionless utopia, entirely blind to the fact that I was the one constantly greasing the gears with my own relentless labor. Confronted with the undeniable math of her own insolvency, a rational business owner would have initiated an emergency audit or sought immediate financial counsel to restructure her debt. Monica, however, possessed an entirely different survival instinct. She bypassed logic and went straight to war on social media. She authored a sprawling, emotionally manipulative manifesto and broadcasted it across her primary Facebook feed and the private community group of her local church. She painted a masterpiece of victimhood. She explicitly accused me of abandoning a sick mother in her hour of greatest need. She labeled me a callous corporate drone, addicted to control because of money. The digital mob mobilized with terrifying speed. Distant aunts, second cousins, and family friends flooded the comment section with righteous indignation. My notification tray became a toxic stream of reprimands. They called me ungrateful. They lectured me on the sacred, unbreakable bonds of blood. But as I read through the vitriol, my analytical mind caught a distinct, highly suspicious pattern. 3 different relatives used the exact same phrase, calling me a financial dictator punishing a fragile woman. Another 2 repeated a highly specific, entirely fabricated story about me demanding exorbitant interest on a past birthday gift. The synchronization was far too perfect. This was not a spontaneous outpouring of support for Monica. This was a chorus reciting a meticulously pre-rehearsed script. She had been quietly planting these seeds of my villainy for months, preparing the soil for this exact harvest. She knew the money would eventually run out, and she needed me to be the monster when it did. The temptation to defend myself was a hollow, fleeting impulse. Engaging in a public screaming match would only feed the chaotic narrative she had carefully constructed. Instead, I deployed the most effective weapon in crisis management: absolute, impenetrable neutrality. I composed a single, sterile sentence and pinned it to my profile. I will not discuss personal finances online. All expenses have now been returned to their proper users. I did not tag her. I did not explain the numbers. I simply closed the door and let the deafening silence speak for itself. That silence, as it turned out, invited an unexpected defector. Late that evening, a direct message arrived from Mara Doss. Mara was a distant cousin on my stepfather's side, someone I saw perhaps once every 3 years at large, obligatory holiday gatherings. She was quiet, observant, and entirely outside Monica's inner circle of sycophants, without any introductory pleasantries or emotional apologies. Mara sent me 3 screenshots. The first 2 images were captures of a private text thread between Mara and Monica from the previous week. In the messages, Monica was boldly dismissing a concern Mara had raised about overspending on a lavish family vacation rental. My mother's digitized words burned through the screen. "Do not worry about the budget," Monica had typed. "Even if Ivy gets mad, she will pay it. She is too afraid of a bad reputation to let us fail." The sheer arrogance of the assumption was breathtaking. But the third image was the truly damning piece of evidence. It was a photograph taken inside the cedar and silk storage warehouse. The focus was a large, hastily erased whiteboard used for tracking the company's mounting liabilities. Columns were drawn for vendor debts, pending refunds, and overhead costs. Off to the far right side, separated from the legitimate business metrics, was a heavily underlined column titled with 2 simple letters and a word: IG Backup. Beneath that heading was a staggering list of financial shortfalls, missing rent payments, and vendor deficits, all slated to be seamlessly covered by my initials. I stared at the crude, hand-drawn letters until my vision blurred. I finally understood my exact position in the family ecosystem. In their eyes, I was completely devoid of humanity. I was not a daughter, a niece, or a beloved cousin. I was a structural component of their fraudulent business model. I was an infinitely renewable, unsecured line of credit. The pain of that profound realization lasted exactly 10 seconds. It was rapidly and violently replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. This was no longer a domestic dispute requiring family therapy or mediation. This was a sophisticated, multi-tiered financial exploitation. I closed the image, opened my web browser, and searched for a very specific type of professional. Within 5 minutes, I had secured an emergency consultation with a senior attorney specializing in aggressive financial litigation and corporate bankruptcy. The messy family drama was officially dead. The calculated legal war had just begun. The conference room at Kincaid and Rowe Asset Litigation felt less like a legal office and more like a surgical theater. There were no warm mahogany bookshelves or plush leather chairs designed to comfort distressed clients. The walls were frosted glass. The table was cold brushed steel, and the air conditioning hummed with a sterile, aggressive chill. I sat across from Elise Kincaid, a senior partner whose reputation in corporate bankruptcy and financial disputes was built on an absolute intolerance for emotional theatrics. I did not offer her a tearful backstory about familial betrayal. I simply slid a silver, encrypted USB drive across the table. It contained the reconstructed ledger, the payment logs, the downloaded emails, and the categorized bank statements I had painstakingly compiled. Elise plugged the drive into her secure terminal. She did not ask me how I felt about the situation. She did not care about the psychological manipulation or the years of toxic guilt my mother had weaponized. Her eyes darted across the meticulously organized spreadsheets, scanning strictly for one thing: personal legal exposure. She was hunting for the invisible tripwires of liability, the hidden guarantees, the unauthorized co-signing agreements, and the corporate entity memberships that could drag me down into the impending crater of my family's financial ruin. "I am running a preliminary sweep of the state business registry," Elise stated, her voice sharp and devoid of inflection. "Your mother operates Cedar and Silk Bridal House as a single-member limited liability company." "Correct." I nodded, confirming my understanding of the business structure. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, accessing databases locked behind heavy subscription paywalls. Suddenly, the rapid clicking stopped. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy and ominous. Elise turned her monitor precisely 45 degrees so I could view the screen. "Look at the amended annual report filed 14 months ago," she instructed. I leaned in, my eyes tracking the sterile government typography. There, listed underneath Monica's name as the primary registered agent, was a secondary executive officer. It explicitly named me, holding the official title of finance director. A cold shock rushed through my veins. I had never seen this document. I had never consented to this role. I had never signed a single piece of paper authorizing my inclusion in the corporate governance of her failing bridal boutique. "I did not sign this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I have never held an official capacity in that company." Elise highlighted a specific line of text at the bottom of the electronic filing. "Look at the recovery contact information attached to your fabricated title." I stared at the screen. The email address listed was not my current professional contact, nor was it my personal address. It was an old, highly specific administrative email I had used exclusively for Gonzalez Controls, my dormant consulting firm. Whoever filed this document had intentionally dug through my discarded business records, resurrecting an old piece of digital identity to construct a fake, seemingly legitimate legal bridge between my pristine credit and Monica's bleeding business. "They needed you on paper," Elise murmured, her eyes narrowing as she opened a new search query. "A finance director with a flawless credit score and a verifiable corporate history is a very useful asset when you are drowning. Let us see exactly how useful." She logged into a specialized commercial credit database, bypassing the standard consumer credit bureaus to look directly at merchant cash advances and high-risk alternative lending. What she found in the next 3 minutes made the fraudulent state filing look like a minor clerical error. Elise pulled up a heavily redacted commercial loan dossier. "I am looking at 3 separate revenue advance loans issued to Cedar and Silk over the past 18 months. The total principal borrowed is nearly $178,000. She clicked a submenu, pulling up the digital execution logs. "These are incredibly predatory loans. They require aggressive daily withdrawals directly from the business operating account, and because the business had terrible cash flow, the lenders required a personal guarantor." She turned the screen back to me. "2 of these 3 loans were secured using electronic signatures bearing your name." The room seemed to tilt. My mother and my cousin Brooke had not merely borrowed money to keep the lights on. They had deliberately committed identity fraud to artificially inflate their credit profile. They had weaponized my financial stability, serving me up on a silver platter to predatory lenders, effectively transferring the catastrophic risk of default squarely onto my shoulders. Furthermore, Elise pointed to the technical metadata attached to the electronic signature certificates. "The IP addresses recorded at the exact moment of signing do not match your apartment or your office network. They geolocate directly to the commercial zip code of the Aurora warehouse." The evidence was undeniable. The fraud had been executed from inside the bridal shop by the very people who claimed to love me. My immediate instinct was to pick up my phone, drive to Aurora, and tear the doors off that warehouse. I wanted to confront them, to scream the numbers in their faces, to demand a confession. Elise saw the tension snap across my jaw and immediately raised a hand, stopping me cold. "Listen to me very carefully," Elise commanded, leaning over the steel table. "You will not call her. You will not text your cousin. You will not post a cryptic update online. You will do absolutely nothing that tips them off to what we know. If you confront them now, they will panic. They will destroy hard drives. They will shred physical ledgers, and they will claim you authorized those signatures verbally. We are in the evidence preservation phase. Total silence." I took a slow, measured breath, forcing the auditor back into the driver's seat. The anger was useless. The data was everything. "What is the immediate protocol?" I asked, matching her clinical tone. My firm will handle the digital extraction. Elise outlined rapidly. We are drafting formal demand letters to the lenders right now, notifying them of the fraudulent guarantees. We will issue preservation of evidence letters to the merchant processors and the state registry. We are going to lock down their ability to hide the paper trail. And my role? I inquired. You are going to do what you do best, she replied. You are going to take this raw data and build a bulletproof forensic narrative. I need a timeline of cash flow and fraudulent execution so simple and so devastating that I can hand it to a bankruptcy judge, and they will understand the entire criminal enterprise in exactly 10 minutes. I nodded once. The division of labor was clear. She would build the legal fortress, and I would forge the financial weapon. I began packing my laptop back into my briefcase, the weight of the betrayal finally settling into a cold, hard resolve. I stood up to leave the conference room, my hand resting on the glass door. Elise looked up from her terminal, her expression hardening into something resembling grim respect. Your mother did not just kick you out of the family, she is trying to kick you into her debt. Elise and I tore into the architecture of cedar and silk bridal house with surgical precision. We did not merely look at the surface-level bank statements. We descended through the deep, convoluted strata of their financial ecosystem. Over the next 12 hours, we pulled massive data sets from the primary business checking accounts, the specialized wedding payment gateways, the point-of-sale terminal histories, the vendor invoicing software, the third-party payroll processor, the state sales tax remittance logs, and the heavy commercial warehouse lease agreements. It was a sprawling labyrinth of disorganized paperwork, mislabeled files, and blatant accounting anomalies. But to a forensic auditor, chaos is never just chaos. It is a puzzle aggressively waiting to be solved. Within the first 4 hours of cross-referencing the payment gateways directly against the vendor invoices, the true operational model of my mother's boutique revealed itself. It was not a struggling retail business suffering from temporary cash flow issues. It was a localized, high-stress Ponzi scheme. I traced the flow of capital and found a terrifying, undeniable pattern of deposit kiting. A massive retainer fee paid by a prospective bride for a lavish spring wedding was immediately, seamlessly liquidated to cover the overdue florist and catering bills for an entirely different client's winter wedding. When the first bride inevitably demanded the standard refund of her unused damage deposit post-event, my mother and Brooke would deploy practice stalling tactics. They would desperately wait for a third, completely unrelated bride to book a venue so they could cannibalize her initial payment to satisfy the first. They were constantly robbing one account to temporarily placate another, living in a perpetual state of 24-hour financial panic. The deeper I dug into the account's payable ledger, the more blatantly Brooke's incredibly sloppy bookkeeping crumbled under professional scrutiny. She was employing a classic evasion tactic known in my industry as invoice splitting. Large expenditures that should have automatically triggered internal warnings or required secondary authorization were systematically broken down into smaller fractions. These fractured charges were always kept deliberately, just under the standard $500 reporting threshold. I flagged dozens of these manipulated line items. When I cross-referenced the vague memo lines, which usually read something generic like vendor adjustment or site maintenance, the underlying truth was sickening. They were not legitimate business expenses. They were Monica's personal indulgences disguised as overhead. A vendor adjustment was a luxury spa weekend retreat. Routine site maintenance was actually a custom designer handbag. She was actively embezzling from her own sinking ship. Then, the most catastrophic liability surfaced from the depths of the files. While reviewing the dense wholesale vendor agreements, I noticed a glaring discrepancy in the corporate tax identification numbers. Monica had not just used my old email address to create a fake title. She had physically exhumed the employer identification number belonging to Gonzalez Controls Limited Liability Company. She had used my dormant consulting firm's federal tax identification to open massive, unsecured lines of credit with high-end fabric importers and international decor wholesalers. She deliberately and maliciously pushed tens of thousands of dollars of commercial debt onto my legal entity, to those overseas suppliers. Monica was merely the purchasing agent, the corporate entity holding the bag. The guarantor they firmly believed was financially backing every single yard of imported silk and velvet was me. I needed absolute proof of intent. Fraud requires a clear demonstration that the act was not a mere clerical error, a lapse in judgment, or an administrative misunderstanding. I found it buried deep in a recovered thread of internal communications between the boutique's main server and Brooke's personal tablet device. I isolated an email sent by my mother exactly 7 months prior. The text was glaringly explicit. "Do not ask Ivy anymore." Monica had instructed her niece in cold, hard text. "Just use her old business file for the credit application. If she ever finds out, we will just apologize later. She will get over it." It was the ultimate smoking gun. It was irrefutable. Time-stamped evidence of willful, premeditated corporate identity theft. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it anyway. Simultaneously, I monitored the boutique's public-facing review platforms and incoming customer service email inquiries. The elegant facade was cracking openly for the world to see. Several former clients were beginning to post highly aggressive complaints regarding severely delayed deposit refunds. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. If this entire house of cards collapsed in a spectacular public fashion, Monica had perfectly positioned her blast shield when the angry brides, the defrauded vendors, and the aggressive alternative lenders inevitably came looking for blood and their missing money. My mother would simply point to the falsified state filings. She would weep, claim she was just the creative visionary, a poor, confused artist who left the numbers to the professionals, and direct all legal fury toward her official finance director. That was her endgame. I was the designated scapegoat. Elise wasted absolutely no time. While I meticulously compiled the narrative, she aggressively prepared a massive deployment of legal artillery. She drafted airtight legal notice packets destined for the predatory lenders, the deceived wholesale suppliers, and the State Business Registry Office. Each thick packet contained a sworn legal declaration unequivocally rejecting the fake signing authority, formally disputing the validity of the personal and corporate guarantees, and demanding the immediate, strict preservation of all electronic records, IP logs, and communication histories under threat of spoliation of evidence charges. We were locking all the doors before Monica even realized the building was surrounded by heavily armed reality. Sitting in that freezing conference room, surrounded by towering stacks of printed digital evidence, my perspective shifted entirely. I was no longer just a hurt daughter trying to untangle a messy personal dispute or merely attempting to protect my own credit score. I was actively dismantling a multi-year sophisticated fraud structure that had been parasitically built entirely upon the pristine foundation of my hard-earned professional reputation. Just before midnight, as I was categorizing the final batch of fraudulent invoices, my personal cell phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown local number. I let it sit for a moment, expecting another wave of vitriol from an angry relative who had seen Monica's social media posts. A minute later, the screen illuminated with a cryptic message. "This is Nora Bell. I used to manage the showroom floor for your mother until I quit last year. I know exactly what they are doing. I did not want to go down with them when it finally exploded. Call me back as soon as you get this. I kept a complete copy of the real books." It was exactly 6:15 in the morning when the sharp digital chime of my front door security system broke the absolute silence of my apartment. I did not flinch. I walked calmly to the entryway and pulled up the live camera feed on the wall-mounted monitor. Standing in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the hallway was Monica. She had not come alone. She had flanked herself with my stepfather, Grant, and Pastor Thomas, a senior clergyman from her local congregation. The strategy was glaringly obvious. It was a classic, high-pressure ambush disguised as a righteous intervention. She had dressed in a conservative, soft-knit cardigan, deliberately projecting the image of a weary, heartbroken matriarch seeking peace. By bringing the pastor, she was attempting to weaponize moral authority, creating an environment where any refusal on my part would be framed as a sin against the family and against God. She wanted to trap me in the social expectation of forgiveness. I was already prepared. According to the strict legal parameters Elise and I had established the previous evening, I initiated my defensive protocols. I placed my smartphone on the narrow entryway console table, ensuring the voice memo application was actively recording the ambient audio. My state required only one party to consent to a recording, and I enthusiastically gave mine. Then, I propped my digital tablet against a stack of mail just out of the visual line of the open door. Elise was already connected via a secure, muted video link. She was sitting in her office, sipping coffee, watching the live feed with the cold anticipation of a predator. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, keeping my hand firmly on the brass handle to maintain a physical barrier. Monica did not offer a greeting. She completely ignored the devastating voicemail she had left days prior. The dramatic eviction was discarded the moment it ceased to be useful. Instead, she immediately thrust a heavy, brass-clipped ledger toward my chest. "I need you to sign this debt restructuring packet," Monica demanded, her voice vibrating with manufactured urgency. "It is just a temporary administrative formality. We have 3 massive weddings this weekend, and the vendor portals are glitching. If you do not sign this right now, the deliveries will not happen, and the brides will be ruined." She was attempting to use the fabricated panic of ruined brides to bypass my analytical mind. It was a pressure tactic designed to force a blind signature. I did not look at the clipboard. I looked directly into her eyes. "Before we discuss any temporary formalities, I need you to explain something to me. Why does the state corporate registry currently list my name as the active finance director of your company?" The question acted like a physical blow. Monica flinched, her carefully constructed mask of exhaustion slipping for a fraction of a second, revealing the sheer panic underneath. She had assumed I was simply angry about being cut off. She had no idea I possessed the structural blueprints of her fraud. "Oh, do not be so dramatic," Monica scoffed, waving her hand dismissively while her eyes darted nervously toward the pastor. "We just used that old administrative email address you set up for your consulting thing to fill out the online profile. You were not even using that account anymore. We needed a placeholder to get the vendor tier upgrade." Elise had warned me that white-collar criminals often confess when they believe they are minimizing the offense. Monica had just casually admitted to digging through my discarded business records, locating a specific digital asset, and utilizing it to bypass corporate identity verification protocols. She had verbalized her guilt directly into my recording device. Grant shifted uncomfortably on his feet, sensing the sudden, dangerous shift in the atmosphere. He stepped forward, attempting to play the role of the reasonable peacemaker. "Ivy, sweetheart, you have to understand. We all talked about it, and we knew you would implicitly consent to helping the family keep the lights on. You always help. We just expedited the paperwork on your behalf because you are always so busy at your firm." Grant was a fool. In his desperate attempt to smooth over the familial tension, he had just legally confirmed that they were fully aware I had not signed the documents myself. He had officially classified their actions not as a misunderstanding, but as deliberate, coordinated forgery based on assumed permission. Seeing the trap closing, Monica immediately abandoned the paperwork and pivoted violently to emotional warfare. "I gave you life," she hissed, her voice rising in the quiet hallway. "I raised you, I clothed you, and now you are standing here, obsessing over some meaningless technicalities, while you actively destroy the livelihood of my employees. You are paralyzing my business because you want to throw a selfish tantrum." She was projecting her own crimes onto me. She was the one who had chained my identity to a sinking ship to keep her business on life support. Yet she demanded I take the blame for the drowning. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my character. I simply reached over to the console table, picked up a thick, rigid manila envelope bearing the embossed logo of Kincaid and Rowe Asset Litigation, and held it out. "I am not throwing a tantrum," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am executing a legal boundary. Inside this envelope is the formal termination of all unauthorized personal guarantees attached to my identity. There is also a cease and desist mandate regarding the fraudulent use of my dormant corporate tax identification number. From this exact second forward, any communication regarding your debts, your vendors, or your business will go directly through my attorney." Monica stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. She refused to take it. Beside her, Pastor Thomas finally moved. For the past 5 minutes, he had stood in silence, rapidly processing the conversation. He had arrived expecting to mediate a standard mother-daughter dispute over hurt feelings and poor communication. Instead, he had just witnessed 2 people confess to federal-level identity theft and corporate fraud. He looked at the heavy legal envelope in my hand, then looked at Monica's pale, terrified face. "Monica," the pastor said, his voice heavy with profound disappointment and sudden clarity, "I was asked here to facilitate a spiritual healing. What I am witnessing is a severe legal and financial crisis built on deception. I cannot be a party to this. I suggest you take that envelope." Without waiting for her response, the pastor turned his back on the group and walked briskly down the hallway toward the elevator. The silence he left behind was deafening. Monica had brought him to be her moral shield, and her own hubris had just turned him into an incredibly damaging witness for the prosecution. She had lost control of the narrative right on my doorstep. Grant reached out with a trembling hand and took the envelope. Monica's face flushed with a dark, ugly rage. The victim persona evaporated entirely, replaced by the cornered panic of a woman who knew she was finally caught. "If you smear my name in this town," Monica growled, stepping aggressively toward the threshold, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper, "if you try to ruin me over this, I will make sure everyone in our family and everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of ungrateful, cold-blooded sociopath you really are. I will destroy your reputation." I looked at the woman who had spent 9 years draining my accounts and leveraging my future for her own vanity. I felt nothing but absolute, freezing clarity. "The truth is not a smear," I replied. I stepped back, gripped the heavy brass handle, and shut the door firmly in her face. The deadbolt clicked into place with the heavy, satisfying sound of a vault locking shut. The atmosphere inside Elise Kincaid's corner office had transformed from a staging area into an active war room. The massive mahogany conference table was entirely obscured by what we called the forensic binder. This was not a chaotic pile of grievances. It was a highly weaponized, heavily indexed encyclopedia of financial truth, specifically engineered for third-party consumption. I had spent the past 48 hours translating complex accounting anomalies into a devastatingly simple narrative. We had a chronological timeline, a color-coded cash flow diagram, a side-by-side signature comparison chart, the geographic Internet Protocol logs, printed email chains, and a 2-inch thick appendix of pristine, original source documents. We were no longer merely parrying Monica's attacks. The machinery of justice was officially powering up, and we were flipping all the switches simultaneously. Elise launched the first volley. She dispatched formal, certified letters of dispute to the aggressive alternative lending companies that held the revenue advance contracts. The language she used was entirely stripped of emotion and heavy with legal consequence. She formally repudiated my electronic signatures, demanded immediate production of their complete underwriting and identity verification files, and instituted a hard legal freeze on any collection attempts directed at me personally. Concurrently, Elise filed an expedited correction with the State Business Registry. Attached to the filing was a heavily notarized, sworn affidavit stating unequivocally that I had never held the title of finance director, nor any executive capacity within Cedar and Silk Bridal House. While Elise fortified the legal perimeter, I neutralized the corporate identity theft. I systematically drafted fraud complaints and fired them off to the high-end international wholesalers who had been tricked into extending credit lines based on my dormant business identity. I immediately closed the compromised employer identification number associated with Gonzalez Controls. I permanently deactivated the breached administrative email portal and placed severe, multi-layered fraud alerts across all major commercial credit reporting agencies. The false bridge Monica had built between her sinking ship and my stable harbor was officially detonated. But a forensic auditor knows that true leverage does not come from merely patching the leaks. It comes from controlling the pressure of the water. This was where we executed the strategic pivot. Instead of waiting for the inevitable public fallout to reach me, I decided to proactively control the blast radius. I recalled the furious emails from former clients demanding their delayed deposit refunds. Elise and I drafted a highly sanitized, incredibly careful piece of correspondence. It was strictly informational, completely devoid of defamatory language, and sent directly to a targeted group of those specific brides. We informed them that there was currently a structural reorganization occurring within the boutique's financial department, and we strongly advised them to formally request proof of escrow for their venue deposits. We gave them the exact accounting terminology to use when speaking to their banks. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic for my mother's operation. When a dozen panicked brides simultaneously contact their banks to dispute massive credit card charges and demand escrow verification, the financial ecosystem reacts violently. Within 24 hours, the boutique's primary merchant processor flagged the account for extreme risk. To protect their own liability, the processor immediately increased the rolling reserve requirement to 100%. They froze every single dollar of incoming daily revenue. Monica's cash flow went from a desperate trickle to an absolute, unyielding zero. The dominoes I had mathematically aligned began to fall with deafening speed. The State Department of Revenue, triggered by the sudden freezing of merchant accounts, dispatched an automated inquiry letter regarding severe discrepancies in the boutique's monthly sales tax remittances. Simultaneously, the management company overseeing the massive climate-controlled warehouse received the updated state registry filings Elise had submitted. Realizing the corporate entity on the commercial lease had been intentionally misrepresented, the landlord issued a formal, aggressive notice of lease violation. Every single hidden loophole, every desperate shortcut my mother had taken over the past 3 years was detonating in a synchronized chain reaction, trapped in a rapidly shrinking box. Monica attempted to execute a final, desperate maneuver to inject cash into the dying business. She tried to leverage her personal assets, frantically applying for a second mortgage on the Aurora house and a series of high-interest personal loans, but the very system she had relied upon to hide her tracks became her ultimate undoing. When the underwriters pulled her files, they collided head-on with Brooke's catastrophic bookkeeping. The bank required 2 years of pristine tax returns. Brooke had maintained 2 entirely different, contradictory sets of financial statements. The overlapping, undeclared liabilities from the merchant cash advances poisoned the debt-to-income ratio. Monica was categorically denied across the board. Her personal credit profile was as toxic as her business ledger. Late Friday afternoon, Elise and I stood in her office, looking at the sprawling, perfectly organized binder on the table. The digital and legal siege was absolute. We had successfully walled off my identity and severed every financial artery Monica possessed. Elise closed her laptop with a sharp, decisive click. She leaned against the edge of the desk, her expression calculating and grim. "She is out of moves, Ivy," Elise said, her voice dropping to a low, serious register. "She cannot borrow. She cannot process payments. And her vendors are preparing to file civil suits. The pressure is critical. She only has one emergency ripcord left to pull to stop the collection calls and buy herself a few weeks of breathing room." I looked at the meticulously compiled evidence of fraud. I knew exactly what Elise was implying. "She is going to file for federal bankruptcy protection," I stated. Elise nodded slowly. "Yes, she will file Chapter 11. She will try to hide behind the federal court to restructure the debt she stole in your name. But when she signs those bankruptcy schedules, the game fundamentally changes. We are no longer dealing with a family dispute or a messy business closure." Elise placed her hand flat on the cover of our forensic binder. "Once she files, she is swearing under penalty of perjury that her financial narrative is the absolute truth. And when she does, the war moves to a battlefield you know better than anyone else." My mother's counterattack was as predictable as it was pathetic. Knowing she was completely financially asphyxiated, Monica resorted to the only currency she had left in her arsenal: public sympathy. She published a highly produced, aggressively edited video across all her social media platforms. The production was a masterpiece of digital manipulation. She spliced a 10-second audio clip of an old, entirely unrelated voicemail where my tone sounded exhausted and dismissive, playing it over a carefully curated montage of photographs. The images contrasted me wearing expensive, tailored wool coats and stepping out of sleek town cars in the financial district, against shaky footage of her looking disheveled and weeping inside her empty warehouse. The accompanying captions spun a tragic, theatrical fable of a ruthless, corporate-obsessed daughter who cruelly abandoned her chronically ill mother during a period of severe economic hardship. She intended to rally the local community into a furious, righteous mob against me. However, she severely miscalculated the psychological demographic of her own industry. Brides planning luxury weddings absolutely despise public instability. The video went viral within the local community groups, but the engagement was highly toxic to her brand. Prospective clients did not see a martyr. They saw a business owner crying in an empty warehouse talking about imminent financial ruin. The reaction was swift and brutal. Over the next 48 hours, 5 separate high-value clients officially canceled their contracts. Terrified their massive deposit money would vanish into the vortex of family drama, Monica had effectively detonated a grenade inside her own sinking ship, completely oblivious to the fact that she was accelerating her own commercial demise, while Monica publicly paraded her victimhood and threatened to file a massive lawsuit against me for supposedly destroying the family legacy. The reality behind her closed doors was sheer panic. Through the digital monitoring alerts I had established, I watched the frantic scrambling of her inner circle. My cousin Brooke was sending desperate, late-night text messages to extended relatives, second cousins, and even our elderly aunts. She was begging anyone with a pulse and a passable credit score to co-sign emergency, short-term bridge loans to cover the payroll she had mismanaged. No one agreed. The family well, having watched my sudden and violent exit, was completely dry. The true investigative breakthrough arrived the following afternoon in the form of a small, silver external hard drive. Nora Bell, the former floor manager, met Elise and me at a discreet coffee shop downtown. She did not ask for money. She simply wanted total immunity from the impending legal fallout. The drive she handed over contained the holy grail of our investigation, the shadow ledger. It held the unedited, raw accounting files before Brooke had sanitized them for the tax authorities. Even more damning were the dozens of high-resolution photographs Nora had covertly taken of the back-office assignment boards. One specific image zoomed in on a handwritten directive in Monica's unmistakable, looping script. The board read, "If Ivy asks about the missing payroll hours, tell her Brooke is doing freelance work for private clients." It was absolute, undeniable documentary proof of active, coordinated concealment. They were actively managing my perception of their theft. Plunging into Nora's raw data later that evening, I uncovered a new financial artery that elevated the entire situation from civil liability to potential federal criminality. I tracked a massive volume of missing cash flow that bypassed the primary business checking accounts entirely. The money was being illegally diverted into a separate, obscure bank account registered under the name Hale Outreach Fund. This was supposed to be a tiny, dormant community charity initiative my mother had set up years ago through her church. Instead, I traced the routing numbers and discovered it was operating as a makeshift money laundering way station. Large corporate retail payments would hit the charity account, sit untouched for exactly 2 days, and then matching amounts would be wire transferred directly into Monica's personal checking account to cover luxury car payments and expensive home renovations. In the realm of forensic auditing, this is known as commingling of funds. It is the absolute destruction of the corporate veil, mixing charitable entities. Business revenue and personal expenses is a massive red flag that transforms a messy business closure into a severe case of potential tax evasion and fraud. If Monica attempted to take this specific financial history into a federal court, the presiding trustee would absolutely tear her life apart. Despite the fury burning in my chest, I strictly maintained my operational discipline. My phone was flooded with messages from acquaintances urging me to publicly defend myself against the viral video. I refused to engage in a digital screaming match. Instead, Elise drafted a terrifyingly precise cease and desist letter. She sent it via specialized courier directly to Monica, demanding the immediate removal of the defamatory video, citing malicious falsehoods and explicitly threatening severe financial damages for tortious interference with our ongoing legal investigations. The video was quietly deleted from the internet less than 2 hours later. Simultaneously, Elise identified a massive structural fracture in the opposition's camp, based on intercepted internal search logs recovered from Nora's drive. It was obvious Brooke was cracking under the immense psychological pressure. Brooke had started using her company computer to frantically search for local criminal defense attorneys. She was leaving a blatant digital trail of panic. Elise smiled when she saw the logs, recognizing the classic prisoner's dilemma playing out in real time. Brooke was terrified of going to prison for forgery and was preparing to throw Monica directly under the bus to save her own skin. Elise immediately began drafting a strategic framework to separate their legal representation, preparing to offer Brooke a tiny window of civil leniency in exchange for a full, sworn confession against my mother. The final confirmation of our strategy arrived late on a Thursday night. I was sitting at my kitchen island, the harsh glow of my laptop illuminating the dark room, when a sharp notification chime broke the silence. An automated alert from the federal bankruptcy court system dropped into my inbox, forwarded directly from Elise's paralegal. Monica Hale and her corporate entity had officially filed a petition for Chapter 11 reorganization. I immediately downloaded the preliminary schedules, the sworn federal documents declaring all of her assets, liabilities, and creditors to the court. As I scrolled through the columns of data, my pulse steadied into a cold, rhythmic beat. The documents were a masterpiece of absolute perjury. She had intentionally omitted significant physical assets, severely misrepresented the nature of her debts, and boldly listed my fraudulent loans as legitimate business obligations she was merely trying to reorganize. She had signed her name at the bottom, swearing under penalty of perjury that the attached lies were the absolute truth. She thought the bankruptcy filing would act as a shield to stop the bleeding. She had no idea she had just walked willingly into the one arena where I held absolute power. The preliminary skirmishes were officially over. The final battle was set. The federal bankruptcy system was designed to be a sanctuary for the honest but unfortunate debtor. Monica intended to use it as a hostage situation. By filing for Chapter 11 reorganization, she activated an automatic stay, a legal force field that temporarily halted all collection calls. Pending lawsuits and vendor aggressions, it was a calculated maneuver to buy Cedar and Silk a few more weeks of artificial life. However, a bankruptcy petition is not a mere application. It is a declaration made under penalty of perjury. When I downloaded her official schedules from the court docket, I saw exactly how she planned to rewrite our history in her sworn declarations. Monica categorized the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had injected into her life not as conditional support or the result of systemic identity exploitation, but as voluntary familial gifts. She legally attempted to wash away her theft by rebranding it as my unprompted generosity. Even worse, her declaration of assets was a masterclass in fraudulent concealment. The luxury sport utility vehicle she had been driving for 3 years was miraculously absent from her property list. A quick public record search revealed the title had been quietly transferred to Brooke exactly 4 days prior to the filing date. The climate-controlled warehouse, packed to the ceiling with premium floral arrangements and imported silk decor, was appraised on her forms at a laughable fraction of its true wholesale value. As for the Hale Outreach Fund, the clandestine account she used for commingling funds, it was buried in a miscellaneous section and listed with a balance of 0. She had handed us a loaded weapon. Elise immediately drafted a massive, aggressively worded objection to the petition. We did not simply ask the court to dismiss her case. We formally submitted our massive cache of evidence and requested an immediate investigation into bankruptcy fraud. Furthermore, Elise filed a notice preserving our right to initiate an adversary proceeding. We were legally planting our flag, preparing to demand that the federal judge declare the debts tied to my identity entirely non-dischargeable because they were fundamentally born from malicious fraud. My task was to ensure the judge would not have to spend hours untangling the financial knots. I spent the weekend building the ultimate comparative matrix. I titled the spreadsheet, Monica's Schedules versus Verified Records. It was brutally simple. The left column displayed her exact sworn statement to the federal court. The right column displayed the undeniable truth. Every single row was anchored by a source document, a specific date, a precise time, a quantified dollar amount, and a glaring contradiction. I mapped the hidden car transfer, the undervalued inventory, and the diverted charity funds. It was an executive summary of perjury so blindingly clear that a person with absolutely no financial background could comprehend the depths of her deception in 5 minutes. But the most devastating piece of ammunition did not come from the ledgers. It came from the digital footprint of the inciting incident itself. While finalizing the timeline of events for the court, I ran a deep metadata extraction on the original voicemail she had left me on that fateful Tuesday night. The timestamp of the recording was 9:47 in the evening. I then cross-referenced that exact moment against the recovered inbox data from Nora's shadow drive. My blood ran completely cold as the true sequence of events crystallized on my screen. At exactly 9:30 that same evening, Monica's primary business email had received a critical, automated alert from the most aggressive alternative lender. The email explicitly warned her that their daily revenue draw had failed due to insufficient funds and that they were officially accelerating the debt collection process, directly targeting the personal guarantor. 17 minutes later, she picked up her phone and delivered the cold, calculated message banishing me from the family. The psychological landscape of the entire ordeal instantly inverted. The voicemail had absolutely nothing to do with maternal disappointment or a sudden emotional flare-up. It was a premeditated crime scene cleanup. Monica knew the financial bombs were dropping. She knew the predatory lenders were about to come hunting for the guarantor on file. She proactively severed our relationship, hoping to push me out of the communication loop so that when the catastrophic debt finally detonated, I would be entirely isolated and forced to absorb the blast. She tried to frame me as a runaway daughter to ensure I had no allies when the collection agency started calling my office. This revelation shattered whatever fragile loyalty remained within her inner circle. Brooke, watching the legal walls close in and realizing federal perjury charges were now legitimately on the table, finally broke, recognizing that her aunt's ship was diving straight toward the bottom of the ocean. Brooke contacted Elise's office and agreed to a limited cooperation deal in exchange for a reduction in her own civil liability. The price of her defection was a fresh, unredacted cache of internal communications. Brooke surrendered text messages that obliterated Monica's defense of ignorance. I sat in Elise's office and read the glowing words on the screen. "Just change the memo line," Monica had texted Brooke months ago. "Leave Ivy's name on the paper for the underwriter. They approve it faster that way." And she never checks. The intent to defraud was now cemented in her own digital handwriting. The federal trustee officially scheduled the meeting of creditors, known as the 341 meeting, to be immediately followed by an evidentiary hearing regarding the integrity of the bankruptcy schedules. Monica, comfortably wrapped in her lifelong delusion, still believed she could walk into a federal courthouse and perform her way out of consequence. She had spent her entire existence using tears, guilt, and dramatic victimhood as her primary currency. She truly thought a federal bankruptcy judge would look at a weeping mother and forgive the discrepancies. She did not understand that the federal court system operates on a different frequency. They do not trade in emotions. They trade in verifiable facts. The night before the hearing, my apartment was completely silent. The manic energy of the past few weeks had entirely evaporated. I sat at my kitchen island with only a single overhead light illuminating the heavy, leather-bound spine of the forensic binder. I was no longer shaking. There was no lingering anger, no residual grief, and no fear. I simply ran my fingertips over the embossed label on the cover. I had audited my own tragedy, reducing years of emotional manipulation into a stack of undeniable data. Tomorrow morning, we would walk into the courtroom. Either my mother would somehow miraculously sustain her lifelong illusion, or the absolute truth was going to bankrupt her right there on the stand. The heavy oak doors of the federal bankruptcy court swung shut, sealing us inside the windowless room. Monica took the stand first. She immediately deployed her signature strategy, weeping softly into a tissue and painting herself as a dedicated, overwhelmed mother facing a cruel, calculated retaliation from a powerful corporate daughter. She begged the judge to look at the moral fabric of a family torn apart, desperately trying to steer the conversation toward emotion and away from the actual financial schedules. Elise Kincaid did not object. She let Monica spin her theatrical web until it was utterly exhausted. Then, Elise stood up and called her only witness. Me. I did not take the stand as an aggrieved daughter. Elise qualified me, and the court officially accepted me as an expert witness in forensic cash flow reconstruction. Testifying on my own legal behalf, I opened the heavy forensic binder. I did not raise my voice, and I did not launch any personal attacks. I simply walked the judge through the chronological logic of the fraud. I presented the side-by-side signature matrix, highlighting the glaring, undeniable discrepancies. I submitted the geographic Internet Protocol logs proving the fraudulent guarantees were executed directly from the commercial warehouse. Then, I laid out the timeline of the eviction. I showed the court the exact timestamp of the aggressive default notice from the predatory lender, followed just 17 minutes later by the voicemail exiling me from the house. I explained the mechanics of the maneuver. It was a preemptive strike to legitimize my fabricated financial role while simultaneously isolating me before the debt exploded. Monica's attorney attempted to interject, claiming these were merely administrative oversights made by a stressed business owner. That defense evaporated the moment Elise introduced the Hale Outreach Fund. Confronted with hard banking records showing charitable community funds flowing directly into her personal checking account to cover luxury expenses, Monica panicked. Her testimony fractured. She changed her explanation 3 times in under 4 minutes, sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights. Seeing the perjury trap snapping shut, the federal trustee called Brooke for direct questioning. My cousin, terrified of facing federal prison for forgery, abandoned ship entirely, under oath. Brooke tearfully confirmed that Monica had explicitly ordered her to keep my name and my dormant corporate tax identification on the vendor files, because it made the business look far more credible to the underwriters. But the absolute, explosive climax of the hearing belonged to the evidence Nora Bell had provided. Elise handed a single sheet of paper to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. It was a pristine photocopy of an old handwritten internal meeting minute from the boutique. Elise asked me to read the highlighted section aloud for the court record. I leaned into the microphone. If the company sinks, Ivy will be the one who bears it because the papers are currently in her name. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. That single sentence, written in my mother's own hand, annihilated the entire illusion of an administrative mistake. It proved, beyond a shadow of a legal doubt, malicious and premeditated intent. The federal judge did not need to deliberate long. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at Monica with profound disgust, and delivered his ruling. He stated clearly that he found massive, undeniable evidence of dishonest filing, the illegal commingling of corporate and charitable funds, and the fraudulent use of another person's identity to secure credit. He ruled that Monica Hale was absolutely not entitled to the protections of the federal bankruptcy code. He officially dismissed her Chapter 11 petition with extreme prejudice, instantly stripping away her legal shield and opening the floodgates for her creditors. The real-world consequences materialized within a matter of days, without the bankruptcy stay protecting her. The aggressive lenders and furious vendors descended upon Cedar and Silk Bridal House. I received automated alerts as her business accounts were frozen solid. A court-appointed receiver arrived at the Aurora warehouse to inventory and liquidate the imported silk and luxury decor. The sport utility vehicle she had tried to hide was aggressively repossessed from Brooke's driveway in the middle of the night. Monica was finally brutally forced to confront the true financial devastation she had created. Her empire was completely dismantled by an audit she herself had initiated. I did not throw a party. I did not post a triumphant update online or call my relatives to gloat. My victory was entirely silent. I went to my cellular provider and changed my private phone number. Finalizing the absolute blockade on all communication, I sat in Elise's office and methodically scrubbed the final remnants of the fraudulent debt from my credit reports, legally and permanently severing my name from the smoking rubble of my family. The true closure came months later, born from the quiet peace of my restored life. I utilized my professional expertise to establish a small, targeted community initiative called the Boundary Ledger Project. I began hosting free, confidential workshops for adults who had suffered severe financial abuse at the hands of their own families. I taught them how to accurately read complex bank statements, how to implement ironclad credit freezes, and how to properly document financial exploitation without letting emotion contaminate the evidence. At the end of every session, I leave them with one foundational truth. Family is not a lifetime access pass to your life, your resources, or your sanity. Saying the word no is never an act of betrayal. It is simply an audit of the truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. Please let me know where you're listening from in the comments so we can interact and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and share it so more people can hear it.